"Want to try?" The question, thick with the condescending drawl of a man utterly convinced of his own superiority, sliced through the biting Scottish wind. The small crowd of elite operators, their forms blurred by the Highland mist, chuckled. It was a cruel, nervous sound, the kind men make when they see another being led to a social slaughter and are simply relieved it isn't them. The target of the mockery, a woman whose fatigue seemed a size too large and whose frame was lost in the sea of masculine bulk, offered no reaction. Her face, framed by a simple, tight bun of dark hair, remained placid, an island of calm in a storm of institutional arrogance. She didn't flinch. She didn't scowl. She didn't even meet the instructor's gaze, her attention fixed instead on the distant, impossible target shimmering in the haze over 2,000 meters away. Her silence was a vacuum, drawing all the noise and bluster of the moment into it, leaving a tense, humming void. But on the observation deck, 100 meters back, Colonel Davies of the Royal Marines leaned forward, his binoculars trained not on the target, nor on the boisterous instructor, but on the woman's stance. He saw something in the subtle shift of her weight, in the way her feet were planted in the damp earth, an economy of motion, a rootedness that spoke not of inexperience, but of a mastery so profound it had become second nature, as unconscious and essential as breathing. He saw a weapon in human form, coiled and patient. If you believe that true competence needs no introduction, type quiet professional below. The instructor, Staff Sergeant Alastair Finch of the Special Air Service, was a man carved from the same granite as the surrounding highlands. He was a legend in his own right, a sniper of considerable skill whose reputation was exceeded only by his ego. He had spent the morning berating a dozen of the finest marksmen from NATO's Special Operations Forces, his voice a lash against their failures. The new rifle, the experimental M210, was a temperamental beast, a weapon of immense power and unforgiving precision. Its recoil could shatter a collarbone, and its ballistics were a complex calculus of wind, temperature, and barometric pressure that had humbled every man on the line. Finch saw their struggle as a personal affront, a sign of weakness in the modern warrior. He paced the firing line like a caged predator, his frustration seeking a vent. He found it in the small, quiet figure standing near the ammunition crates, an American officer he'd dismissed at the morning briefing as a logistics liaison or some intelligence analyst sent to tick a box. He saw her unassuming presence as an invasion of his sacred domain, a world of mud, gunpowder, and masculine grit. His challenge was not an invitation. It was a public execution, a tool to reassert his dominance. "Go on, love," he sneered, gesturing with a theatrical sweep of his arm toward the monstrous rifle resting on its bipod. "Show all these highly trained operators how it's done." The laughter from the line grew louder, a wave of complicity that washed over the woman, isolating her completely. Still, she did not react. Instead, with a slow, deliberate motion, she unzipped a small pouch on her belt and removed a pair of simple, unadorned shooting gloves. She pulled them on, her movements methodical, each finger smoothed into place with a practiced efficiency that was utterly at odds with the role Finch had assigned her. The air grew thick with anticipation. The silence she commanded was no longer passive. It felt active, charged, like the moment of stillness before a lightning strike. The woman moved from the periphery to the center of the stage, her steps measured and even across the damp, springy peat. She didn't hurry, nor did she hesitate. Her progress was a study in deliberate purpose, each footfall placed with the certainty of a creature perfectly at home in its environment. The snipers on the line parted for her, a silent, almost biblical parting of the sea of camouflage and testosterone. Staff Sergeant Finch watched her, a smirk playing on his lips, his arms crossed over his broad chest. He continued his running commentary, his voice dripping with sarcasm meant to carry on the wind. "Mind your step now. Don't want to break a nail." A few of the men chuckled again, but their laughter was weaker this time, tinged with a growing unease. There was something in her posture, a profound and unnerving self-possession, that began to erode the foundation of their mockery. She reached the firing mat and knelt, not with the awkward genuflection of a novice, but with a fluid, single motion that brought her body into perfect alignment with the M210 rifle. Her hands, covered in the worn leather of her gloves, made their first contact with the weapon. It was not a grasp. It was a greeting. Her fingers traced the lines of the stock, tested the tension of the bipod, and slid over the cold steel of the receiver with the delicate, intimate touch of a surgeon examining a patient. She ignored the state-of-the-art Kestrel weather meter and its complex digital readouts lying beside the mat. Instead, she plucked a single blade of long grass, held it aloft, and watched its gentle arc as the wind carried it away. She tilted her head, listening, her eyes half closed as if sensing the invisible currents of air flowing through the glen. Finch's smirk faltered. "Having a chat with the bloody fairies, are we?" he barked, his voice a little too loud, a little too sharp, betraying the first crack in his arrogant facade. She didn't answer. Her focus was absolute. Her world had compressed to the rifle, the wind, and the distant speck of steel. She settled behind the weapon, her shoulder finding the recoil pad with an audible sigh of perfect placement. Her cheek welded to the stock, her eye finding the scope. Her body became an extension of the machine, a seamless integration of flesh, bone, and steel, creating a firing platform of unshakable stability. The other snipers watched, their amusement curdling into a knot of disbelief and dawning respect. They recognized the economy of her movements, the utter lack of wasted energy. They saw in her a level of ritual and discipline that surpassed their own. This was not the fumbling of an amateur. This was the sacred rite of a master. The range fell utterly, completely silent, the only sound the mournful cry of the wind, a sound she seemed to understand as a language. The silence on the range was no longer just an absence of noise. It became a presence, a heavy blanket of expectation that smothered all other sensations. The world seemed to hold its breath. Staff Sergeant Finch stood frozen, his arms no longer crossed, hanging uselessly at his sides. The condescending smirk had vanished, replaced by a tight, unreadable line. He was watching a process he had taught for 20 years, a sequence of actions he could perform in his sleep, but he was seeing it now, as if for the first time. The woman's breathing was the only perceptible motion. A long, slow inhale, a pause, a controlled exhale that emptied her lungs, creating a moment of physiological stillness, the sacred pause where the shot must be born. Her index finger, a study in deliberate intent, moved from the frame of the rifle to the trigger. It didn't touch the metal, not yet. It hovered, a hair's breadth away, waiting for the perfect alignment of mind, body, and environment. The crosshairs and the high-powered scope settled on the target, a 10-inch steel plate that appeared as a mere pinprick against the vast, heather-strewn hillside. To the naked eye, it was invisible. Even for the seasoned operators who had failed to hit it, it was a ghost, a rumor of a target. The wind, the true enemy on this range, was a malevolent, shifting force, gusting unpredictably through the valley. It was a sniper's nightmare, but she saw it. She felt it. Her calculations were not digital. They were intuitive, instinctual, born from thousands of hours spent in similar hellscapes. She wasn't aiming at the target. She was aiming where the target would be in the 3 long seconds it would take the massive 338 caliber bullet to cross the intervening space, accounting for a trajectory that would arc dozens of feet into the air before descending with terminal velocity. She held for the wind, a subtle adjustment of the reticle to a point in empty space that seemed nonsensical to anyone else. Then, the universe contracted to the space between her finger and the trigger. There was no pull, no jerk. There was only a steady, building pressure, a final act of will that became one with the rifle's mechanical function. The explosion was deafening, a concussive roar that echoed off the granite walls of the glen, a clap of manufactured thunder. The M210 bucked against her shoulder, a violent, powerful recoil that would have thrown a less experienced shooter off balance. She absorbed it, her body a perfectly designed shock absorber, her eye never leaving the scope. For 3 agonizingly long seconds, there was nothing, only the echo of the shot fading into the wind. The operators held their breath, their eyes straining toward the distant hillside. And then it came. A sound, not loud, but clear, distinct, and utterly undeniable. A high, sharp ping, the sound of a hypervelocity round striking hardened steel. It was a sound of impossibility, a note of pure, unadulterated perfection played across 2 kilometers of hostile air. A single, perfect, dead center hit. The metallic ring of the impact, a sound that had been absent all morning, hung in the air for a moment before being swept away by the ever-present wind. But its message remained, seared into the consciousness of every person on that firing line. It was a sound of refutation, a clear and final answer to the arrogance and doubt that had poisoned the atmosphere. In its wake, a new kind of silence descended, deeper and more profound than before. It was a silence of awe, the collective gasp of a dozen hardened warriors witnessing something that bordered on the supernatural. They stared at the electronic hit indicator, a small green light that had just flashed to life beside the target camera monitor, confirming the impossible. Then their gazes shifted as one, from the monitor to the woman still lying prone behind the rifle. She hadn't moved. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't even looking for affirmation. Her hand moved with the same unhurried grace as before, working the bolt action of the M210. The motion was smooth, practiced, a single fluid cycle. The large brass casing, still smoking faintly, was ejected, spinning through the air in a perfect arc before landing with a soft clink on the firing mat beside her. She guided the bolt forward, chambering a new round, then engaged the safety. Her cheek detached from the stock, and she slowly pushed herself up, her movements as calm and deliberate as if she had just completed a simple, routine task. She had just fired one of the most difficult shots imaginable, in terrible conditions, with an unfamiliar weapon, under the weight of public humiliation, and she acted as if she had just finished a cup of tea. It was this profound lack of reaction, this absolute professional calm in the face of her own extraordinary feat, that truly shattered the onlookers. It spoke of a confidence so deep and unshakable that it required no external validation. The act was its own reward. The perfection was its own statement. Staff Sergeant Alastair Finch was a statue. The blood had drained from his face, leaving a pale, waxy mask of shock. His mouth was slightly agape, the words of sarcasm and mockery dead on his tongue. He looked from the green light on the monitor to the woman, and back again. His mind, a finely tuned machine for calculating ballistics and windage, was struggling to process the data. It wasn't possible. The wind hold she had used, the speed of her setup, the instinctual nature of her process. It defied the rigid doctrines he had spent a lifetime mastering and teaching. He uttered a single phrase, a whisper that was almost lost in the wind. No way. It was the sound of a belief system crumbling, the first tremor in the earthquake that was leveling the foundations of his professional world. He had built his identity on being the best, the expert, the gatekeeper of this lethal art. And in a single, perfectly executed shot, this quiet, unassuming woman had shown him that he was not even in her league. From the raised observation platform, a figure began to descend the wooden steps. Colonel Davies moved with the unhurried authority of a man accustomed to absolute command. He was a veteran of conflicts that were now just footnotes in history books, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard-won experience. His presence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere on the range. As he approached, the stunned operators instinctively straightened up, their shock momentarily replaced by the ingrained reflex of military discipline. Finch, jolted from his stupor, turned and snapped to attention, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over the colonel's shoulder. Davies ignored him completely. His focus was entirely on the American woman, who was now methodically cleaning the bolt of the M210 with a small, oil-stained cloth she had produced from a pouch. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze taking in the details the others had missed. The slight were on the knuckles of her gloves, the faint, faded insignia of a chief petty officer on her collar, almost invisible against the camouflage pattern, and the quiet intensity in her eyes that seemed to see through the physical world into the complex physics that governed it. The colonel did not speak of the shot. He did not offer congratulations. Instead, his voice was low, almost conversational, yet it carried the weight of a formal inquiry. Bagram, winter of '09. We were testing the Whisper prototype, a suppressed, subsonic system for high-angle urban hides. The system failed. The extractor kept freezing solid. He paused, his eyes locked on hers. There was an American operator with the unit, a specialist. They said she could field strip the bolt assembly blindfolded in under 30 seconds and remachine the extractor claw with a hand file to make it work in the sub-zero temperatures. They called her Echo. He wasn't asking a question. He was stating a fact, waiting for confirmation. The woman looked up from her work, her hands still for the first time. Her eyes met the colonel's. A flicker of mutual recognition, the silent acknowledgement of two professionals who had walked the same shadowed paths, albeit on different missions, in different years. The Mark II variant had a weaker detent spring, she said, her voice quiet but clear. The cold made it brittle. We learned to pack the housing with a low-viscosity graphite lubricant. It solved the problem. Her answer was purely technical, devoid of ego or story. It was the confirmation Davies needed. The legend was real. He nodded slowly, a deep and profound understanding passing between them. He then turned, his full attention finally falling upon the pale and sweating Staff Sergeant Finch. The full force of his command presence was now unleashed. Staff Sergeant, he began, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. You are an exceptional instructor and one of the finest marksmen in the British military. But your assumptions today have made you a fool. Colonel Davies held Staff Sergeant Finch in his gaze, a moment of silent, potent rebuke that stretched into an eternity. The wind whipped around them, but the space between the three figures was still and charged. You believe your eyes, the colonel continued, his voice a low, cutting blade. You see a woman of a smaller stature. You see a quiet demeanor. In your mind, your trained professional mind, fills in the rest with a litany of tired, pathetic prejudices. You assumed she was a secretary, a paper pusher. You assumed she was lost. You assumed she was weak. He took a step closer to Finch, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. Assumptions, Staff Sergeant, are the mother of all operational failures. They get men killed. Today, they simply got your pride killed. Consider it a cheap lesson. The colonel then pulled a ruggedized military tablet from his jacket. His thumb moved across the screen, unlocking it and navigating through secure files with practiced ease. He held it out for Finch to see. Perhaps it's time you started believing the data instead of your gut. On the screen, illuminated in the gray Highland light, was a personnel file. The narrator's voice would now adopt that staccato, impactful rhythm, listing the credentials as Finch's eyes scanned the screen in horrified disbelief. Name, Thorne Maya A. Rank, Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The name meant little, but the unit designation was a thunderclap. DevGru, SEAL Team 6. The most elite, secretive, and lethal special operations force in the American arsenal. The screen scrolled. Qualifications. Master Sniper, U.S. Navy. Lead Instructor, Naval Special Warfare Sniper School. Lead Instructor, DevGru Green Team Selection, Close Quarters Combat, and Advanced Marksmanship. Combat Deployments, Classified, 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 Redacted. A list of locations that were a history of the last 2 decades of Shadow Wars. Medals and citations. Navy Cross, for heroism in a firefight in the Hindu Kush, where she held off a numerically superior enemy force for 6 hours, allowing her team to evacuate their wounded. Silver Star, for gallantry in action during a hostage rescue mission. Bronze Star with Valor Device, 3 awards. Purple Heart, 2 awards. Mission classifications. Tier 1 Operator, Special Activities Division Clearance. The list went on, a cascading torrent of elite accomplishment, each line item a testament to a warrior forged in the crucible of the world's most dangerous places. Finch felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The woman he had mocked, the love he had condescendingly invited to try, was not just a competent soldier. She was a living legend, a ghost who walked the highest echelons of the special warfare community. She was the operator they told stories about in hushed tones in barracks after missions went sideways. She was Echo. Colonel Davies retracted the tablet. He turned back to Chief Petty Officer Thorne, who had finished her work and was now standing respectfully. The colonel's entire demeanor changed. The stern commander vanished, replaced by a soldier paying tribute to another. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He executed a salute, not a casual gesture, but the sharpest, most formal parade ground salute he could render. It was a gesture of profound respect, an acknowledgement from a senior officer of one nation's military to an NCO of another that transcended rank and protocol. It was a warrior's salute to a warrior. Chief Thorne, Davies said, his voice resonating with authority and sincerity. My apologies for the unprofessional welcome. It is an honor to have you on this range. Your evaluation of this weapon system is now the primary mission objective. The sound of a dozen other hands striking their brows in salute echoed his own. Finch, his face a mixture of shame and awe, raised his hand last, his salute the most rigid of all. The story of that single shot and the thunderous revelation that followed did not stay contained within the misty confines of the Scottish Glen. It traveled, as such stories do in the tight-knit world of special operations, with the speed of an encrypted radio burst. It became a legend whispered in the mess halls of Hereford, the ready rooms of Fort Bragg, and the team houses of Coronado. It was a story told not as a piece of gossip, but as a parable, a modern military fable with a powerful moral. It was passed between operators with a nod and a knowing look, a shared piece of cultural wisdom. They called it Echo's shot, or the day Finch went quiet. The name of Chief Petty Officer Maya Thorne was spoken with a new reverence, her call sign Echo taking on a deeper meaning. She was the quiet report that arrived long after the impact, the silent force whose effects were felt long after she had gone. Her legend was not one of loud heroics, but of quiet, undeniable, world-class competence. The story served as a powerful corrective, a cultural reset button for a community that, for all its professionalism, was not immune to the subtle poisons of ego and assumption. It became a cautionary tale for every team leader, every instructor, every operator who thought they could judge a book by its cover. The name Alistair Finch, once a byword for elite skill, was now inextricably linked with this legendary humbling. Yet, the story's impact on Finch himself was the most profound. He was not drummed out of the service or officially reprimanded. Colonel Davies knew that public shame was a far more effective and lasting punishment. Finch endured the quiet, knowing looks from his peers and the sudden respectful silence that fell whenever he entered a room. He took it all, but he did not break. He bent. He learned. A few days after the incident, he found Chief Thorne alone on the range, long after the day's training was complete. She was firing the M210 again, not at targets, but into a ballistic gel block, studying the impact patterns. Finch approached slowly, without his usual swagger. He stood for a moment, waiting to be acknowledged. "Chief," he began, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "There's no excuse for my behavior. It was unprofessional. It was ignorant. I'm sorry." Maya Thorne finished her observation, made a note in a small, waterproof book, and only then turned to face him. She simply nodded. Apology accepted. Staff Sergeant. Finch hesitated, then pushed on, the question he truly wanted to ask finally surfacing. "The wind," he said. "I was watching you. You didn't dope the scope for it. You didn't use the Kestrel. You just held over. I've never seen anyone make a 2,000-meter shot with a pure holdover in a variable crosswind like that. How did you know?" It was a question from one professional to another, a genuine plea for knowledge from a man who had just realized the limits of his own expertise. He was no longer the arrogant instructor. He was a student. Maya Thorne looked at the humbled SAS instructor, her expression giving nothing away. There was no triumph in her eyes, no hint of "I told you so." There was only the calm, focused attention of a professional addressing a technical query. She turned her gaze from Finch to the vast, sweeping valley before them, a landscape that was not just scenery to her, but a complex, three-dimensional map of interacting forces. "The wind in a place like this isn't a straight line," she began, her voice low and even, the voice of a teacher. It doesn't just blow from left to right. It flows like water. It tumbles down that far ridge, creating a downdraft. It splits around that outcropping of rock 1,000 meters out, creating a vortex. Then it gets squeezed between these two hills, accelerating before it hits the firing line. The flags and the meters only tell you what the wind is doing right here or right there. They don't tell you the whole story. She pointed with her chin towards the distant target. You can't just read the wind. You have to listen to it. You watch the way the heat shimmers off the rocks. You see how the tall grass bends in waves, not all at once. You feel the pressure change on your face. Each part of the valley tells you a piece of the story. You just have to put them together. She paused, then delivered the core of her philosophy, a piece of wisdom that went far beyond the mechanics of marksmanship. The wind has a memory, Staff Sergeant. It remembers the shape of the land it just passed over. Your job isn't to fight it. It's to understand it. You listen to its story, and then you become part of it for a moment. Finch was silent, absorbing her words. It was a Zen-like approach to a science he had always treated as pure mathematics. She was talking about art, about instinct, about a level of oneness with the environment that he had never even considered possible. Her grace in that moment, her willingness to share her hard-won knowledge without judgment, was a more profound lesson than the shot itself. It was the mark of a true leader. In the weeks that followed, the legend of the event solidified into a physical artifact. Colonel Davies, true to his character, sought to immortalize the lesson. He recovered the single, spent 338 Lapua Magnum casing from the firing line. He had it polished to a brilliant shine and mounted on a small, dark plaque carved from a piece of ancient Scottish oak taken from a fallen tree near the range. The plaque was simple, bearing only 2 lines of engraved text. The first line was a stark, technical fact, 2,140 meters. Variable crosswind. The second line was the moral of the story, a phrase that would become the new unofficial motto of the Joint Training Facility. Competence is quiet. The plaque was mounted on the wall of the main briefing room, directly over the podium where instructors would stand to address new trainees. It was the first thing they saw when they arrived and the last thing they saw when they left. It was a permanent, silent reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is rarely the loudest. Months melted into a year. The seasons turned over the Scottish Highlands, burying the range in snow and then revealing it again in the vibrant green of spring. The M210 rifle, following a series of exhaustive trials, was officially adopted by several NATO special operations units. The final approval report was heavily influenced by a detailed, 50-page evaluation submitted by CPO Maya Thorne. Her report was a masterpiece of technical writing, a dense, data-driven analysis of the weapon's performance under every conceivable condition. It included recommendations for minor modifications to the trigger assembly and a new coating for the bolt to improve performance in extreme cold, a direct, unspoken reference to the lessons of the Whisper prototype years before. There is not a single word in the entire document about the incident with Staff Sergeant Finch. No mention of the challenge, the mockery, or her perfect shot. The report was as sterile, professional, and devoid of ego as the woman who wrote it. Her silence on the matter was, in its own way, the final, most powerful statement. True professionals do not need to advertise their victories. The results speak for themselves. The plaque on the briefing room wall became a part of the institution's culture. For every new class of sniper candidates, British, American, or otherwise, the first brief began not with a lecture on ballistics, but with the story of Echo's shot. The instructor who told the story was often Staff Sergeant Alistair Finch. He stood before the young, eager faces, men full of the same pride and confidence he once had, and he pointed to the plaque. He told the story without varnish, painting himself not as a victim, but as a fool. He laid his own arrogance bare for them to see, using his failure as the ultimate teaching tool. "Look at this," he would say, his voice quiet and reflective, a stark contrast to the booming caricature he had once been. "This casing represents the finest shot ever fired on this range. But that's not the lesson. The lesson is that the operator who fired it was the one I dismissed, the one I mocked. I looked right at the deadliest person I've ever met, and I saw nothing. Why? Because I wasn't looking. I was just projecting my own ego. He would let that sink in before continuing. Your biggest enemy isn't out there, he'd say, gesturing to the wild landscape. It's in here, he'd tap his own temple. It's your assumptions. It's your pride. It's the voice in your head that tells you you're the expert. From the moment you think you know everything, you are no longer an asset. You are a liability. Look for the quiet ones. Watch the ones who listen more than they talk. The real masters of this craft don't need to announce their presence. You'll know them by their results, and only by their results. The legacy of Maya Thorne was not written in official commendations or public accolades. She would have hated that. Her legacy was quieter, more profound. It lived on in the changed culture of a training center, in the newfound humility of an instructor, and in the minds of a new generation of warriors who were taught to value competence over confidence and silence over swagger. Her single act of quiet professionalism had a ripple effect, spreading outward, subtly altering the DNA of the community she served. She never returned to that Scottish range. Her work took her to other, darker places, to nameless conflicts on classified maps. She remained a ghost, a whisper, her existence known only to a select few. Yet, her impact was permanent. The story became a touchstone, a piece of institutional folklore used to inoculate new operators against the disease of arrogance. It reminded them that skills are honed in solitude and silence, that true strength is measured not in words spoken, but in targets hit, missions accomplished, and brothers and sisters brought home safely. It taught a simple, elemental truth of the warrior's path. The empty vessel makes the loudest sound. The true weight of a legacy is not measured in the stories you tell about yourself, but in the lessons that others learn from your actions. It's not about the medals pinned to your chest, but about the standards you inspire in those who follow. Maya Thorne's legacy wasn't the shot. It was the silence that followed it. It was the moment of stunned awe that forced a dozen hardened men to reevaluate their entire worldview. It was the quiet grace with which she taught a humbled rival. Her professionalism was her weapon, her silence was her shield, and her competence was her voice. In a world obsessed with noise, with self-promotion and endless chatter, she was a testament to the enduring power of quiet, demonstrated excellence. She proved that respect is not something you can demand. It is something you command, often without saying a word. She reminded us all that the deepest rivers flow with the least sound, and the most formidable spirits are often the most serene. Her story endures as a powerful inspiration, a timeless lesson that true worth is not found in the volume of your voice, but in the precision of your actions and the integrity of your character. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.